good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is.
Dobro večer.
What is it called in Croatia? It's 6 o'clock.
Dobro
Is
večer.
it evening or
Evening.
night?
Evening.
Evening, okay. Good evening.
Dobro večer.
It's good to be with you.
Dobro je biti s vama.
And even though we're going to talk about a very solemn and serious subject, I want you to feel really free to ask questions.
Iako ćemo govoriti o ozbiljnoj temi, slobodni ste postavljati pitanja.
And there are no silly or stupid questions.
I nema glupih pitanja.
Because we're all going through something together we have not ever gone through before.
Jer proći ćemo nešto što nismo prolazili, što nismo sami prošli prije.
So it'll be real good for us to share ideas and share struggles.
Ćemo biti dobro podijeliti ideje i naše borbe.
If you look on the screen behind me, what is that you see?
Ako pogledate na ekran iza mene, što vidite?
Have you seen that before?
Jeste to vidjeli prije?
Nikad. Prije, ali sad, u zadnje 2 godine.
Now in the last year or two.
That's right, yeah. It's interesting that none of us, I say none, very few of us have ever seen this before 2 years ago.
I zanimljivo je da nitko od nas to nije vidio prije više od 2 godine.
We didn't know about COVID-19.
Tada nismo znali za COVID-19.
We knew about coronavirus because it's a very common virus, but not the variant that we have now.
Znali smo za koronavirusa, ali nismo znali za ovu varijantu koju imamo sad.
But almost anywhere I go, if I show this slide, everyone will know what it is.
Ali gdje god da idem po svijetu, svi će prepoznati ovu sliku.
So we have learned about the enemy, basically.
Tako da smo u principu naučili o našem neprijatelju.
Now, what we're going to talk about tonight is not the science of COVID.
Ono o čemu ćemo večeras govoriti nije znanost o covidu.
I am not a scientist.
Ja nisam znanstvenik.
I'm an educator and a theologian.
Ja sam obrazovni radnik i teolog.
So we're going to talk about this from the perspective of understanding, education-wise.
Ćemo razgovarati iz perspektive obrazovanja.
And equally understanding about the effects of this theologically.
I jednako tako razgovarat ćemo o efektima vezanim uz teologiju.
Where is our faith system in all of this?
Gdje je naš sustav vjere u svemu tome?
I saw a sign that I want to show you. Please work. Is it not working? Pardon me, I'm not an engineer either. There we go. Well, now that it's moving, let me take this out.
Vidim display tamo u postavkama.
Treba obrasiti ponovno pale.
That's going to be a burden.
Try it.
There we go, okay. Now, thank you for your patience.
Hvala vam za strpljenje.
We'll try it again, there we go. I saw this sign not long ago.
I vidio sam taj znak ne tako davno.
And how true it is, the world is closed.
I how true it is?
No, how true it is. It is true, the world is closed.
Aha,
I'm sorry, I'm old English.
istina je da je svijet zatvoren.
I travel a lot of places in the world to teach, and I can't go anywhere.
I ja sam inače običavao putovati na mnoga mjesta, podučavati, ali sad nisam mogao nigdje.
And mostly for the first year that COVID was out, I couldn't leave my home.
I prve godine kada je došao COVID, nisam mogao izaći iz svoje kuće, napustiti svoju kuću.
Part of it is because I had COVID early on.
Ja djelomično zbog toga što sam prvo imao COVID.
So I was getting well from that.
I morao sam se oporaviti od toga.
And it just wasn't safe in a city like Dallas, Texas.
I jednostavno nije bilo sigurno u gradu poput Dallasa.
Too many people.
Previše ljudi.
So I hadn't seen my daughters in 2 years.
I svoje kćeri nisam vidio 2 godine.
I haven't seen my grandchildren in 2 years.
I svoje unuke nisam vidio 2 godine.
I haven't seen my sisters in 2 years.
I svoje sestre nisam vidio 2 godine.
I've seen my wife.
A vidio sam svoju ženu.
And she kind of wishes she hadn't seen me.
A ona nekako je željela da je barem da me barem nije vidjela.
Go visit somebody, she said. So I'm here.
I rekla mi je, idi posjeti nekoga. Evo, zato sam ja ovdje.
But the world is closed. Let me just ask you a question, and Mislav will translate for us. What did it feel like to you to be told you can't go anywhere?
I postavio bih vam pitanje, kakav ste osjećaj imali kad vam je bilo rečeno da ne smijete nikamo ići?
I was happy.
You were happy?
I'm an introvert and that's great.
Yeah, you were you're contemplative, so you like the...
Znači introverti mogu.
You like the monastery.
Yes.
Yeah. How about the rest of you when you were told, if you go, you can't go inside, you can't have more than so many people, you can't go to the market? What did that feel like?
Kako je vama ostalima? Kako ste se osjećali da ne možete doći na određeno mjesto jer tamo je ograničen broj ljudi?
Can we agree it was different? Whether we like it or not, it was different?
Da li, bez obzira slažemo li se ili ne, je li to drugačije?
You know, I'm an old man and I'm used to getting up and getting dressed and getting in my car and going to get a cup of coffee or go to the bookstore and read or go see my friends or...
Ja sam stari čovjek, ja volim se ustati, obući, izaći van, otići na kavu ili u knjižaru ili sastati se sa prijateljima.
And even on Sunday morning when we had church, we had it on my computer screen through Zoom.
I čak crkva je nedjeljom ujutro bila na kompjuterskom ekranu, na Zoomu.
I didn't see any of my church family for a year and a half.
I nisam nikoga iz svoje crkvene obitelji vidio 1.5 godina.
And we even had some nights that we would play games with our church. We played bingo. Do you have bingo here?
We know.
You know bingo, okay. We would play bingo over Zoom. We'd all be in our houses and we all have our little cards and when you'd say bingo!
I čak bi neke večeri igrali i bingo ili tombolu preko ekrana.
And you try to say it before anybody else said it out loud on the screen.
I probajte to reći naglas da ste dobili dobitak prije svih drugih na ekranu.
But one thing that COVID did for us is it's left a lot of empty spaces.
Ono što je COVID učinio, to je da je ostavio mnogo praznih mjesta.
And pardon me, while I have my tablet up here, because I have English on that, I don't understand that.
Prostite, imam ovdje svoj tablet, jer ne razumijem hrvatski koji je tamo.
But for the first time in my life, I don't know about yours, I had to encounter empty spaces.
Ali po prvi put u svom životu, ne znam kako je s vama, trebao sam se susresti sa praznim mjestima.
And the world was full of empty spaces.
A svijet je pun praznih mjesta.
And what we're going to talk about tonight is a little bit of what COVID did. We're going to talk about death and dying and grieving.
I razgovarat ćemo o smrti, umiranju i žalovanju.
And what COVID did was to show us that death can come very quickly to some very healthy people.
I ono što nam je COVID pokazao da smrt može doći vrlo brzo i čak i za neke ljude koji su izgledali zdravo.
And very sudden, and that's very different for a lot of us.
I vrlo iznenada za mnoge od nas.
My mother had leukemia when she died.
Moja majka je imala leukemiju kad je umrla.
And it was a very aggressive kind of leukemia.
I to je bio agresivan tip leukemije.
And even though it was aggressive, it took 4 or 5 years for her to get sick enough to die.
Iako je bio agresivan tip, trebalo je 4 do 5 godina da ona umre.
So we knew that that was going to happen.
Tako da smo znali da će se to dogoditi.
But with COVID, death came very quick. A few days for some people.
Ali sa COVIDom smrt je došla brzo, za neke ljude čak i u nekoliko dana.
And it caught a lot of us off guard. We weren't ready to grieve that. We didn't know we had to grieve that.
I mnogo nas je ostavilo onako bez obrane, iznenadilo i morali smo proći kroz tu žalost.
It's kind of like this picture.
Poput ove slike.
It was a healthy tree just a week ago.
Prije tjedan dana to je bilo zdravo drvo.
And now it doesn't exist in the forest anymore.
I sada ono više ne postoji u šumi.
And that's hard for us.
I to je nama teško.
We're very social beings. God made us very social beings.
Jer Bog nas je učinio društvenim bićima.
And whether we're introverts or not, we like some people around.
I bez obzira jesmo li introverti ili ekstroverti, trebamo neke ljude oko sebe.
But I don't know about you, but I want to choose when I don't want people around.
A ne znam za vas, ali ja želim odabrati kada ne želim ljude oko sebe.
But what we've learned is that death casts a shadow.
Ono što smo naučili da je smrt bacila sjenu.
The person is gone.
Osoba je otišla.
But the memory prevails.
Ali ostaje sjećanje.
And it's like a shadow.
I ona je poput sjene.
It's just there.
Jednostavno
I can't touch it.
Nalazi se tamo, ne mogu je dodirnuti.
But I know Mama is there. I know Papa is there.
Znam da su mama i tata tu.
Right now I'm working, in addition to teaching, I'm working with a group in Dallas, and it's not a ministry, it's a company called Hospice.
I momentalno radim s jednom grupom uvezano uz hospicij.
And in order to qualify to be in hospice with us, the doctors have to say there is nothing else I can do to make you okay if someone is sick.
I da bi neko bio uključen u hospicij, doktor mora reći da se apsolutno ništa, nikako više ne može pomoći.
And for our company to be pulled in, the doctor has to say, I cannot treat you any longer, and within 6 months, if your disease takes its natural course, you will die.
I ako doktor kaže tu se više ne može što napraviti i za 6 mjeseci bolest će dovesti do svog ishoda.
So my role is that of a pastor.
I onda je moja uloga kao pastora.
Every patient that I talk with and every family I talk with, someone is going to die within 6 months.
Svaki pacijent s kojim razgovaram i s obitelji s kojom razgovaram, neko će umreti za 6 mjeseci.
And that is very hard for people to understand and to put their arms around.
I ljudima je jako teško to razumjeti i prihvatiti.
Because death always leaves a shadow.
Jer smrt uvijek ostavlja sjenu.
And what we talk about with families is, well, I have one gentleman, his wife died yesterday, that I've been working with for 6 months.
I imali smo jednog gospodina koji je
his wife died yesterday, but I've been working with him for 6 months.
Njegova žena je umrla jučer, a on je s njom radio 6 mjeseci.
And what he and I have talked about, he said, is it okay if I talk to her after she dies?
I on je upitao, je li u redu ako ja nastavim dalje razgovarati s njom i kada ona umre?
And I said, absolutely.
I on sam rekao, apsolutno.
You may talk to her as much as you wish.
I možeš razgovarati s njom koliko god želiš.
I have never been there, so I don't know if she hears or not.
Nisam bio tamo, tako da ne znam da li ona čuje ili ne.
But if you need the hope that she hears you, then we have hope.
Ali ako ima nade da je ona tamo, onda i dalje ima nade.
And he was able to cope with things a little bit, knowing that even though her body would not be there, that she would live on in his heart.
I on je se mogao s tim boriti, iako je njezino tijelo više nije bilo tamo prisutno, ali barem je bila prisutna u njegovom srcu.
So we could embrace the shadow.
Tako da možemo prigrliti tu sjenu.
There's another thing before we really get into the meat of what we're going to talk about, and I don't have COVID, but my allergies are going crazy. So I apologize for my nose running.
Ispričavam se za moj nos, ja nemam COVID, ali imam alergiju.
So you won't catch what I have, I hope. Hope your nose doesn't run.
I nećete uhvatiti ono što ja imam.
But anyway, death is not one-dimensional.
Smrt nije jednodimenzionalna.
It isn't just that you're here and then you're gone.
To nije da je tu si i više te nema.
It's multidimensional. Everyone in your life is affected by death.
Ona je multidimenzionalna. Sve u životu pod njenim utjecajem.
And it's kind of like saying, I wish I could be at my own funeral.
To je kao da kažete, volio bi da sam na svom vlastitom pogrebu.
Because I would like to see who came.
Jer volio bi vidjeti tko je došao.
And I would be really hurt if no one came.
I bio bi povrijeđen da nitko ne dođe.
That would mean I didn't matter, maybe.
I to bi značilo da nikome ništa nisam značio.
But I can guarantee you someone will be there.
Ali ja ti mogu garantirati da će netko doći.
Because it's not one-dimensional. It's not like the flame. It's here and it's gone.
Nije jednodimenzionalno kao plamen koji je tu i onda nestane.
And death ripples across time.
I smrt daje one valove kroz vrijeme.
We have a memory, and then we have another memory, and then we have another memory, and it just goes on and on and on across
Imamo
time.
sjećanje i onda opet imamo sjećanje, pa opet sjećanje i tako to ide kroz vrijeme.
How many times do you get together with your families, and the subject always comes up about old grandmother or old uncle or someone who passed away years ago?
Koliko puta kada se nađete sa obitelji i onda dođe neko sjećanje ili razgovor o staroj baki ili o starom ujaku ili o nekome.
My grandmother's been passed away for 20 years, and she still is a subject at our house anytime our family gets together for dinner.
Moja baka je preminula prije 20 godina, ali još uvijek ona dolazi u našim razgovorima.
Partly because she was such a bad cook.
Djelomično zbog toga jer je bila loše kuhala.
You couldn't eat what she fixed.
I jednostavno nismo mogli jesti ono što je ona spremila.
But we pretended it was good.
Ali mi smo se pravili kao da je dobro.
So when we get together, we eat something that's good, and we go, oh, that's not like Granny would make it.
I onda kada nešto probamo, onda bi rekli, to je nešto kao da je baka spremila. Kao da nije spremila.
But, you know, her memory goes on, and that's why death is not one-dimensional. We don't just die and then we're forgotten about it.
I zato to sjećanje se dalje nastavlja. Nije smrt jednodimenzionalna i da smo potpuno nestali.
Now, we're not here today to talk about your death, unless you want to.
I ovdje nismo da bi razgovarali o vašoj smrti, osim ako ne želite to.
We want to talk a little bit about what it's like to be a survivor of someone else's death.
Ovdje smo da razgovaramo o tome kako preživjeti nečiju smrt.
So we're going to talk about life and grief, loss and grief during a pandemic.
I zato ćemo razgovarati o gubitku i žalovanju za vrijeme pandemije.
How many people in Croatia have been reported to have contracted COVID? Do you know?
Koliko ljudi znamo da je u Hrvatskoj dobilo COVID?
What's your guess?
Da li to znate?
From the very beginning,
Kolika
from
je-
the first case of COVID to now.
Kolika je vaša procjena od prvog slučaja covida do danas?
Do you know? Well, there's no reason to know.
Nema razloga da znate.
5,000 maybe.
500,000.
500,000.
500,000 people
500,000 ljudi.
in Croatia that have that the health departments have found out about have contracted, not died from, but contracted COVID.
Znači, postoji izvješće od zdravstvenog zavoda da je 500,000 ljudi bilo zaraženo, dobilo COVID. Ne da je umrlo, nego dobilo.
And of that 500,000, 9,500 have died.
A od tih 500,000, 9,500 je umrlo.
In my country, in the US,
U mojoj zemlji, u SAD-u,
we've had 47 million cases of COVID.
imali smo 47 milijuna slučajeva covida.
And 750,000 people have died from COVID.
A 750,000 ljudi je umrlo od covida.
That's a lot of people
I to je puno ljudi
who were here 2 years ago,
koji su bili ovdje prije 2 godine
who are not here now.
i kojih više nema.
Now, it's one thing to die in an accident.
Jedno je umreti u prometnoj nesreći,
It's one thing to die of a protracted sickness,
drugo je umreti od bolesti,
you know, or a lot of things that normally we think of when people die. But to go, we didn't have to die. The virus invaded our body and killed us.
I mi mislimo, pa nismo morali umreti, ali virus je ušao u naše tijelo i ubio.
And what happens is, it ends up leaving us with what we call a prolonged or protracted grief cycle.
I onda nas je ostavio, kako to nazivamo, sa odgođenim ciklusom žalovanja.
It's more severe when it's that way than if it's just normal death, whatever normal death is.
I to je ozbiljnije nego da se radi o slučaju kako bi nazvali normalnoj smrti.
And let me tell you a little bit of difference, and we'll talk more about it a little bit later. But if someone is sick from other things than COVID, if they have a terminal illness, or they're old, or they're a bad driver.
I ako uzmemo za primjer ne COVID, nego ako neko umre zato što je teško bolestan ili je star ili je loš vozač,
then we get ready for their death.
I onda spremni smo za njihovu smrt.
My grandmother that I told you about that was a bad cook, she was 104 years old when she died.
Sjetite se moje bake koja je bila loš kuhar, ona je umrla sa 104 godine.
We thought she would die a long time before she did.
I mi smo mislili da će ona umreti puno prije nego što je ona umrla.
In fact, I asked her one day what was her secret to living so long.
I jednog dana sam je pitao koja je njena tajna za njenog dugog života.
And she said, John, I just forget to die.
Odnosno, zašto nije umrla ranije. A ona je rekla, jednostavno zaboravila sam umreti.
And I said, well, I'm glad.
Drago mi je.
But when she died, it was sad. I miss her tremendously. But I got to grieve ahead of time.
I bilo je tužno kada je ona umrla, ali ja sam tugovao prije njezinog odlaska.
I got to prepare for her death.
Mogao sam se pripremiti za njezinu smrt.
And that's called anticipatory death. Anticipatory grief.
I to se zove smrt koja se pretpostavlja, koja se predviđa.
So I got to get ready for it.
Tako da sam bio spreman za to.
What we've learned this last 2 years is we don't get to get ready for it.
A ono što smo u zadnje 2 godine naučili da nismo bili spremni za to.
I did some volunteer work this last 2 years in a retirement home for people older than me, which is hard to find.
U zadnje 2 godine imao sam volonterski rad u domu za starije i teško je naći starije od mene.
And we tried very, very hard to keep them safe.
I vrlo nam je teško bilo držati ih na sigurno.
But occasionally, someone would come in to visit them that we didn't know about, or somehow they would go out to visit a family member and they would catch COVID.
I povremeno bi neko ih posjetio za koga nisu znali da ih je posjetio, ili bi oni otišli posjetiti nekoga i dobili bi COVID.
And within a matter of 3 or 4 days, they would have died.
I u roku od 3 do 4 dana oni bi umrli.
A week ago, I was having lunch with them.
Tjedan dana prije toga imao sam ručak s njima.
And now they're gone.
A sada su nestali.
I don't get to grieve them anticipatorily. I don't get to do it ahead of time.
Znači nisam mogao pretpostaviti, nisam se mogao pripremiti prije vremena.
Probably while I check my slides here, I think I have one out of order. Okay, Mislav, I need you to help me.
Okay.
When this comes up, what it says. The next slide.
Losses and COVID-19.
That's okay. I have a different picture in my tablet, but that's okay. We've got the same topic.
Same title.
Yeah, same title. One of the things that we've discovered is there's a new malady, a new sickness that's come out.
A ono što smo naučili je da dolazi nova bolest.
And I'm going to say it, and I'm not sure there's a translation for it, except what I'm going to say.
Okay.
And it's called Takotsuba myocarditis.
Oh. I ta bolest se zove Takotsuba
Myopathy.
Miopatija. Trebamo pogledati u riječnik.
To je govor u jezicima.
Aha, dobro.
And that's the fancy name for it.
I to je ovako uglađeno ime za to.
And what it means is, I died of a broken heart.
A ono što to znači je, umro sam od slomljenog srca.
That my heart was broken, and then something else what happened in my body, and I got sick.
Znači, moje srce se slomilo i zbog toga je nešto loše pošlo u mom tijelu.
And that's why we're talking about our subject tonight. Because we don't want to die of a broken heart. We don't want to not grieve appropriately and healthfully when someone passes away.
Jer mi ne želimo umreti sa slomljenim srcem, želimo na pravi način žalovati.
So let's look at what you and I have lost in this last year and a half or 2 years as a result of COVID. What are some things that you know of that you don't have now that you had before?
I pogledajmo sada te gubitke koje smo podnijeli zbog COVID-19. Što ste vi i ja izgubili u ovom periodu?
What are some things that are gone now?
Koje su to stvari koje su nestale? Sigurnost.
Anybody lose their job?
Safety.
Safety? Okay, absolutely.
Da li možda neko izgubio posao?
Job? Money?
Novac?
Social life?
Društveni život?
You know, one of the losses that we find is economic security, is safety.
Jedan od gubitaka je ekonomska sigurnost.
You know, prior to this, we could save our money at home. We could say, okay, it's going to take this much money for us to live if we live so many more years, and we didn't have security, but we had economic promise. But that all went away.
Prije toga mogli smo planirati našu ekonomsku budućnost, štedjeti i biti sigurni u ekonomski ishod, ali to je sad nestalo.
My daughters and my son lost their jobs.
Moje kćeri i sin su izgubili posao.
My son is a server at a restaurant,
Moj sin je konobar,
a nice restaurant in Dallas,
jedan fini restoran u Dallasu,
and the restaurant had to close,
i restoran se trebao zatvoriti,
so he lost his job.
tako da je on izgubio svoj posao.
My daughters are school teachers,
Moje kćeri su učiteljice u školi,
and the school only retained a certain number to teach virtually, to teach online or virtually.
Aha. I one su bile zadnje koje su počele podučavati online.
So they lost their jobs.
Tako da su izgubile svoj posao.
They thought they would always have a job as a school teacher.
A mislili su da će imati za stalno posao kao učiteljice.
So what does it feel like not to have safety anymore?
I kakav je to osjećaj ne imati sigurnost?
What does that feel like for you? I know what it feels like for me.
Kakav je to osjećaj? Ja znam kakav je to osjećaj za mene.
You know, that's one of the basic needs of human existence is safety.
To je jedna od temeljnih potreba čovjeka, sigurnost.
I want to know when I go to bed at night that I want to wake up okay in the morning.
Ja želim znati kada legnem u krevet navečer da ću se u dobrome probuditi ujutro.
Nobody's going to break into my house and take my things.
Nitko neće provaliti u moju kuću i uzeti mi stvari.
Or hurt me.
Ili me povrijediti.
Feel safe.
Osjećam se sigurnim.
And you've had an experience that I've never had in my country, in the experience that you had during your war recently.
I vi ste imali iskustva koja ja nisam imao u svojoj zemlji, a to je da ste imali rat.
I'm sure it didn't feel safe during that time.
I siguran sam da se niste osjećali sigurno u to vrijeme.
This is even quicker, isn't it? This doesn't respect the boundary. You know, the enemy is 300 miles away. The enemy is next door or in my living room here.
Ali ovdje nema više granica, nema više fronte tamo, neprijatelj je tamo, nego ovo dolazi unutar kuće.
Yeah, so security is gone that we lost. It'll take us a while to build it back. It'll come back, but it won't come back quickly.
I iako je sigurnost otišla, ona će se vratiti postepeno, ali treba vremena da se vrati.
Another loss that we had was health.
Drugi gubitak je zdravlje.
Now we may not have had COVID, or you may have recovered from COVID, but there may be some lasting effects from that.
Možda ste imali COVID, pa ima nekih posljedica od toga.
When I got COVID right at the very beginning in March of 2020.
Kad sam ja imao COVID u ožujku 22.
They didn't know how to diagnose it because they'd never seen it before in our city.
I u mom gradu to nisu znali dijagnosticirati jer to je bila nova bolest.
So I didn't have to go to the hospital, but I had pneumonia really bad.
I nisam išao u bolnicu, ali sam imao tešku upalu pluća.
I couldn't taste or smell.
Nisam mogao i nisam imao okus niti njuh.
And I couldn't breathe.
I nisam mogao disati.
I could walk from here to that camera and I had to sit down and catch my breath.
Kad bi samo hodao odavde do kamere, ja bi morao sjesti da bi uhvatio zraka.
And that was scary.
I to je bilo strašno.
It's kind of like being a kid and going swimming and you get underwater and you can't breathe. You really struggle.
Kao da se gušite pod vodom i borite za zrak.
But I got over the COVID.
Ali sam prošao kroz COVID.
It took almost a year to get my smell back and my taste back.
Trebalo mi je godinu dana da dobijem ponovo njuh i okus.
It still kind of comes and goes.
I još uvijek dođe i ode.
But I have a lung disease now that I didn't have before.
I sada imam plućnu bolest koju prije nisam imao.
And it's called interstitial lung disease, and there is no cure for it.
I to je taj naziv za tu plućnu bolest i nema lijeka za to.
And the doctor said you don't have COVID anymore, but you have this now that COVID brought along for you.
I doktor je rekao, nemaš više COVID, ali sad imaš ovo što ti je COVID donio.
And I asked him what the cure was.
I pitao sam ga koji je lijek za to.
And he said a lung transplant.
A on je rekao transplantacija pluća.
I said I don't think so.
Ja sam rekao, ne slažem se.
Number one, I'm too old for a lung transplant.
Prvo, prestar sam za transplantacije.
I would not take healthy lungs from anybody.
I ja ne želim nikome zdrava pluća uzeti.
And then he said, no, you're going to die before the disease catches up with you.
Ali on je rekao, ti ćeš umreti prije nego što bolest jako napreduje.
I said, that's fine. How long am I going to live? If you know I'm going to die before the disease gets me.
Dobro je ako znaš koliko dugo ću živjeti da me bolest ne dohvati.
And he said, I don't know.
A on je rekao, ne znam. On nije znao.
But until I die, I'm going to continue breathing and doing the things I like to do.
Ali dok ne umrem, ja ću i dalje disati i raditi stvari.
But I was a healthy man before that.
Ali ja sam bio zdrav čovjek prije toga.
And now I'm not a healthy man.
I sad više nisam zdrav.
My health went away because of COVID. I lost my health.
Izgubio sam svoje zdravlje.
We have a lot of friends and family that lost their health.
I imam mnoge prijatelje i članove obitelji koji su izgubili zdravlje.
So safety and health.
Tako da je zdravlje i sigurnost i zdravlje.
Food security.
Sigurnost hrane.
How was it here? I know how it was in Texas.
Kako je bilo ovdje? Ja znam kako je bilo u Teksasu.
And how it still is.
I kako je još uvijek tamo.
There are things we can't buy anymore.
Ima stvari koje još uvijek ne možemo kupiti.
In our market that we used to eat all the time.
Na našoj tržnici koje smo neprestano jeli.
And our big supermarkets run out of food.
I naši veliki supermarketi su ostali bez hrane.
Because the supply chain can't keep up with it.
Zato jer se lanac nabave prekinuo.
So what do? We put more food in the cupboard in case we run out.
Radimo onda, punimo svoje ormare, smočnice, za slučaj da nestane hrane.
That's a scary thing too. Safety and food are two vital things for us.
Sigurnost i hrana su vitalne stvari za nas.
We've lost friends.
Izgubili smo prijatelje.
Not that they've gone away, we can't see them anymore.
Nije da su oni nestali, nego ne možemo ih više vidjeti.
We can see them 2 meters apart.
Ili ih vidimo udaljeni 2 metra.
Maybe.
Možda.
We've lost friends in connection with friends.
Izgubili smo prijatelje i vezano s prijatelje.
We've lost ceremony and tradition.
Izgubili smo ceremonije i tradicije.
We don't get to go to graduations anymore.
Ne idemo više na promocije.
We didn't get to go to weddings anymore.
Na vjenčanja.
We didn't get to go to funerals anymore.
Niti nas provode.
We have a lot of people in the US that are waiting to have family funerals.
Mnogi ljudi u SAD-u čekaju da bi imali sprovode za svoje.
Because they couldn't get together anymore. So that's a different thing.
Zato jer se nisu mogli okupiti. To je nešto što je promijenilo stvari.
We've lost stability.
Izgubili smo stabilnost.
And there's safety again.
I opet sigurnost.
We've lost a sense of personal freedom.
Izgubili smo osjećaj osobne slobode.
You know, I don't know about you, but I take a lot of pride in the fact that my 6 feet or 2 meters around me is mine.
I sad mogu biti ponosan na to što je ovih 2 metra oko mene da su to moji.
And now I could get out of this if I wanted to, but now I'm stuck with my 2 meters. I don't have the freedom to go where I want to go and do what I want to do.
Mogu ići gdje god sam htio, ali sad sam zapeo tih 2 metra oko sebe.
I wanted to go visit my sisters that I haven't seen in 2 years, but I can't go to their house.
Htio sam posjetiti svoje sestre i otići u njihove kuće, ali ne mogu ući u njihove kuće.
They live a long way away, and the drive, number one, I can't go. Number two, I can't go to their house because my brother-in-law is sick.
One žive daleko. Pod 1, a pod 2, moj šogor je jako bolestan.
We've lost future dreams.
Izgubili smo te snove za budućnost.
It's interesting to talk to high school students or university students, and you ask them what their dreams are, and I hear a lot of them say, if we get COVID under control, then I may want to do this.
Zanimljivo je razgovarati sa srednjoškolcima i studentima i oni govore kada ovaj COVID prođe, onda želim nešto napraviti.
How do you plan for the future right now?
kako planirati budućnost sada?
You know, in times past when I would come here to visit and to teach, I could make my reservations on the airplane a month in advance maybe if I waited that long.
Prije kada sam dolazio podučavati, onda bi mogao napraviti rezervaciju samo mjesec i pol dana za avionsku kartu.
I had to make my reservations early this time in hope that I got to come.
A ovaj put sam morao puno ranije, u nadi da ću doći.
I got stopped in Dallas.
Stao sam u Dallasu.
I had to show all of my papers.
Pokazao sam sve moje papire
before I left.
Prije nego što sam krenuo.
I got stopped in Frankfurt.
Stao sam u Frankfurtu.
Show all my papers.
Pokazao sve moje papire.
I got stopped when I got here.
I opet sam bio zaustavljen ovdje.
Show all my papers.
Da pokažem svoje papire.
Had to tell them where I was going to be and fill out a form that said if I get sick, I have to call them and they will come get me.
I morao sam potpisati papir na kojem piše da ako se razbolim, da onda će oni da znaju gdje sam i da oni dođu po mene.
So future is not very long, is it?
Tako da budućnost nije dugačka.
We can't dream that far in advance like we used to.
Ne možemo tako daleko imati snove za daleku budućnost.
Our role is different.
Naša uloga je drugačija.
And then death is imminent.
A onda smrt je ona koja je krajnja.
And I took all of those things that we just mentioned, and if you put them in a Venn diagram, this is what it looks like. All the effects.
Ako uzmete sve ove stvari, sve te učinke, onda možete staviti ovakav dijagram.
And we're in the middle.
A mi smo u središtu.
And all of these things around us are impacting us every day.
A sve ove stvari oko nas imaju utjecaja.
So, what do we do? How do we get through this thing?
I što da činimo? Kako da prođemo kroz sve ovo?
Do we just bury our heads in the sand and say, no, I'm not going to live anymore?
Da zabijemo glavu u pjesak i kažemo nećemo više ovo proživljavati?
That's no answer, is it?
A to nije odgovor.
That doesn't help us at all. We have to stay optimistic and hopeful.
Moramo ostati optimistični i pomagati.
What we have to do is learn how to grieve.
Ono što moramo naučiti je kako žalovati.
And that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of our time together. How do we grieve? How do we grieve when someone dies? Or how do we grieve when we have a loss of something that's not death, a loss of safety and security?
Kako žalovati? Kako kad izgubimo nešto što je sigurnost, što je budućnost?
The stages are the same.
Etape su, faze su iste.
Now, let me share one slide with you, and then we're going to take a short break.
Reći ću vam jednu stranu, a onda ćemo napraviti kratku pauzu.
The line on the left-hand side
ova linija sa lijeve strane
is how we want grief to work.
Je ono što mi želimo kako da naše žalovanje funkcionira.
I want to start here.
Želim započeti ovdje.
And I want to finish here.
I želim završiti ovdje.
And I want it predictable, what I want to do all the way through.
I želim da to bude predvidivo sve ono što ću činiti.
And then I'll know I finished grieving.
I onda znam da ću završiti svoje žalovanje.
But the picture on the right hand side,
ali slika sa desne strane,
is how grief really works.
Je ono kako žalovanje funkcionira u stvarnosti.
Do you see any straight lines in that?
Jel ovdje vidite ravne crte?
No.
Ne.
It's all over the place.
Ono, svugdje su oko, po cijelom prostoru.
And that's the hard part for those of us who like our world to be in order and to be predictable and to be good and kind and I want to know what I'm going to wake up to tomorrow.
I to je teško za nas koji želimo imati svoj život u redu, da je predvidljivo, da je sve dobro.
Grief won't let us do that.
Ali žalost nam to neće dozvoliti.
We'll have good feelings one day.
Imat ćemo dobre osjećaje jedan dan.
And harsh feelings the next day.
A teške grube osjećaje drugi dan.
Then back to good feelings again.
I onda opet nazad u dobre osjećaje.
Then sad feelings.
I onda opet u tugu.
And then more sad feelings.
I onda još tužnih
And
osjećaja.
then a good day.
I onda dobar dan.
And it's just all over the place.
I onda smo svugdje po tom prostoru.
And what I want to say now, then we'll take our break and we'll come back and talk about it more, is grief has a beginning.
Žalost ima svoj početak.
And the beginning is when the loss occurs.
Početak se događa kada se dogodi gubitak.
Whether it's a severe loss like someone dies,
Je li to ozbiljan gubitak kao kad netko umre,
or a different loss like I've lost security or safety,
ili drugačiji gubitak kad sam izgubio sigurnost,
I've lost the ability to be with my friends,
ili kad sam izgubio mogućnost biti sa svojim prijateljima,
I've lost the sense of future.
i izgubio sam smisao, pojam budućnosti.
It has a beginning. It has a place where it starts.
I to je to mjesto gdje to počinje.
And it has a place where it ends.
I ima mjesto gdje to završava.
I can promise you that.
I to vam mogu obećati.
There will be a day when the grief will not be as harsh.
I mogu to će biti dan kada tuga neće biti tako teška.
The loss is still very real,
Gubitak će i dalje biti stvaran,
but it won't hurt as much.
ali neće toliko boljeti.
So I can promise you there's a beginning,
Tako da vam mogu obećati da ima početak,
and there's an end,
ima kraj,
and there's a lot of stuff in the middle.
a jako puno stvari ima između toga.
Now, let's take a short break and we'll come back and talk about what's going to be in the middle.
Uzmemo kratku pauzu i onda ćemo razgovarati o tome što se događa između toga.
Any instructions for them? No, just break.
Just break.
Just
Znači
go.
pauzu.
Let's go.
Ima ješ.
Are we all back?
Jesmo li se svi vratili?
I think we are all back. All broken and back.
Svi
Our
smo
break.
slomljeni i vratili se.
Okay. I am by nature a very cheerful person.
Po prirodi ja sam vesela osoba.
And topics like this kind of eat into my cheerfulness.
I ovakve teme nagrizaju moju veselost.
And so it will not be strange if when we leave tonight, we're all feeling kind of down.
I neće biti čudno ako odemo odavde pa se osjećamo onako opterećenima.
It's a very serious subject.
Jer ovo je vrlo ozbiljna tema.
But I hope we can put some things in here to help us, we can encourage us as we travel through grief.
Ali nadam se da ćemo dobiti neke stvari koje će nas ohrabriti dok putujemo.
So let's look at the next slide.
Pogledajmo sljedeći slajd.
And what it says next to the lady is that mourning and grief and sorrow are all natural responses to loss.
I ono što kaže sa lijeve strane ove dame, tuga, žalost i jad su prirodne reakcije na bol.
Now, what do you think that means?
I što mislite da to znači?
That mourning and grief and loss are natural.
Da su tuga, žalost i gubitak prirodni.
Da muški mogu i plakati.
That men can cry too.
Absolutely.
Apsolutno.
And if you don't believe me, just follow me around a little bit. I am a crybaby.
I to je točno. Samo me pratite i vidjet ćete kako ja znam plakati.
And what it says is it's natural. It's a gift that God gave us.
I ono što kaže da je to prirodno, to je dar koji nam je Bog dao.
Now, let's wrestle with that for just a moment.
Ajmo se malo za moment jedan hrvati sa time.
Because I like my gifts to be nice and good, and I like things I enjoy.
Ja želim da moji darovi budu lijepi, dobri, u nešto u čemu ja mogu uživati.
It's kind of hard for me to think about grieving as a gift.
Teško mi je shvatiti žalovanje kao dar.
But let me tell you how it's a gift, then we're going to talk about how we get to unwrap the gift.
Sad ću govoriti o tome kako je to dar i kako da raspakiramo taj dar.
You know, the beauty of our God is that He knows each and every one of us.
Ljepota kod našeg Boga je da On poznaje svakog od nas.
The Bible says He's known us from the beginning of time and will know us until time doesn't exist anymore.
I u Bibliji kaže da nas On poznaje od prije početka vremena i poznavat će nas i kad vrijeme završi.
He knows the number of hairs on our head.
I On poznaje koliko vlasi na glavi imamo.
And He doesn't have to count very much anymore for me.
I kod mene ne mora više toliko puno brojati.
He's kind of relieved a little bit.
I sad mu je lakše.
He doesn't have to count as much.
Da ne mora toliko brojati.
But why would God give us the gift of mourning?
A zašto bi nam Bog dao taj dar žalovanja?
What do you think? Why would that be a gift from God?
Što mislite, zašto bi to bio dar od Boga?
Žalovanje, ali ne očajavanje.
Grieving but not despair.
Okay, exactly.
Točno.
God knows what it means for us to have a broken heart.
Bog zna za nas što to znači imati slomljeno srce.
And I think we know that God got to experience that at the crucifixion of Jesus.
I znamo da je Bog to proživio prilikom raspeća.
Can you imagine what it felt like, what it would feel like if one of your children looked at you and said, "Why have you forsaken me?"
I što mislite kad bi vas vaše dijete gledalo i reklo zašto si me zaboravio?
Like Jesus did when he looked into the sky and looked to his Father, "Why have you forsaken me?"
I kao što je Isus pogledao u nebo na svog oca i rekao, zašto si me zaboravio?
And God had to let Jesus die that day.
I Bog je morao dopustiti da Isus umre toga dana.
I think he knows a broken heart.
I mislim da On poznaje slomljeno srce.
But he also knows that our broken heart can heal.
Ali također zna da i naše slomljeno srce može zacijeliti.
And that healing of a broken heart is called grief.
A isceljenje slomljenog srca se zove žalovanje ili tuga.
So God gave us the gift of grieving and mourning as a way to heal our broken heart.
I tako nam je Bog dao taj dar žalovanja da bi iscijelio naše slomljeno srce.
Now, it's as natural for us to grieve as it is for us to breathe and to eat and to sleep.
Žalovati je prirodno za nas, isto kao što i jesti i disati.
Also, it's as natural for us not to grieve as it is for us not to go to sleep or not to eat.
I isto tako žalovanje nije prirodno, isto kao što nije prirodno da spavamo ili jedemo.
We can choose not to do that. I can choose not to sleep.
Ja mogu izabrati da ne spavam.
It's not healthy.
I to nije zdravo.
Doesn't last very long.
I ne traje dugo.
I can choose not to eat.
Mogu izabrati da ne jedem.
It's not very healthy.
To nije zdravo.
It can make me sick.
I zbog toga se mogu razboljeti.
But it's natural to eat and to sleep.
Ali prirodno je jesti i spavati.
In the same way with grief, I can choose not to grieve.
Isto tako sa žalovanjem mogu izabrati da ne žalujem.
But it's not very healthy.
Ali to nije zdravo.
And if I choose to grieve, God has built into us the ability to do that.
I ako izaberem da ću žalovati, Bog je to ugradio u nas.
Now, one of the things that people like myself who study psychology have a really good time trying to do is figure out why people do what they do.
Znači, psihologija je ta gdje ljudi poput mene proučavaju zašto ljudi čine to što čine.
And that's what we did when we look at grief and mourning. We have looked at it and said, here's what people do when they grieve and mourn.
I kad promatramo žalovanje ili tugovanje, onda vidimo, ljudi to čine kada se to događa.
And we decided to call them stages of grief.
I onda to nazivamo fazama žalovanja.
Stage is a good word for a psychologist.
I te faze su dobra riječ za psihologiju.
We like those words.
Mi volimo takve riječi.
So we decided to find the stages of grief.
Znači, volimo naći te faze ili razine tugovanja.
And we didn't invent what people do, we observed what people do.
I mi nismo izmislili ono što ljudi čine, nego smo promatrali što ljudi čine.
Now let's look at the 5 stages in the... I need to stop a minute. If you read the literature, you're going to read that some people say there are 5 stages of grief.
I ako čitate literaturu, neki kažu da ima 5 faza žalovanja.
Some say there's 7 stages of grief.
Neki kažu da ima 7.
And some say there are 9 stages of grief.
A neki kažu da ima i 9.
It doesn't matter.
Ali to nije važno.
We're going to talk about 5.
Mi ćemo razgovarati o 5.
It's faster.
I zato je brže.
And it covers everything.
A sve pokriva.
Okay? So let's look at the 5 stages of grief.
I da pogledamo tih 5 faza žalovanja.
Now, all the slides we have, this one is the messiest. My fault, the messiest.
Od svih slajdova ovaj je u najvećem neredu zbog moje krivnje.
Because it has a lot of material on it.
Jer ima jako puno materijala.
And Yvonne was gracious enough to translate for us.
I Ivan je bio dovoljno dobar da nam to prevede.
But when I typed this one in, I locked the screen, so he couldn't get inside and change the English words.
Ali ja sam zaključio taj slajd i onda nije mogao promijeniti engleske riječi.
So he did a wonderful job of typing the Croatian above all the English.
Tako da je Ivan stavio hrvatski iznad engleskog.
So it's like vegetable soup.
I ovo je kao juha od povrća.
We just stir it around.
I samo smo sve zamiješali.
So let me just kind of walk through this and see if we can pick out the big chunks of the vegetables, okay?
I proći ćemo kroz ovo i da probat ćemo one velike komade povrća probrati.
The first stage of grief that we observe
Prva faza žalovanja, ono što smo primijetili,
is called denial.
se naziva poricanje.
Now, that's not an uncommon word for us, is it?
I to je česta riječ kod nas.
What does it mean to be in denial?
Što to znači poricati, biti u poricanju?
Ne prihvaćati istinu.
Do not accept truth.
I don't accept it. I don't recognize it.
Ne prepoznajem, ne priznajem.
And part of what happens with grief is I decide if I don't recognize it, it didn't happen.
I ono što se događa sa tugom, ako ja to ne priznajem, znači to se nije dogodilo.
He's going to wake up pretty soon.
On će se probuditi uskoro.
They're going to come back.
Oni će se vratiti.
They're not gone forever.
Nisu otišli zauvijek.
And denial is part of that gift that God gave us.
I poricanje je dio tog dara koji nam je Bog dao.
Now, it sounds contradictory
Zvuči kontradiktorno
to say denial would be a gift.
Da je poricanje dar.
But have you ever known anyone who was in a serious accident?
A jeste li upoznali nekoga koji je imao tešku nesreću?
And the doctors get to the scene of the accident and they look at the victim and the first thing they say is, oh my, he's going into shock.
I da doktori dolaze na mjesto nesreće i pogledaju i kažu, taj ide u stanje šoka.
Why is that? Why does our body go into shock when it's hurt?
Zašto naše tijelo ide u stanje šoka kada se nađe u povredi? Protection. We couldn't handle the pain if we were consciously aware of it. Jer ne možemo podnijeti tu bol ako smo svjesni.
The pain is too intense.
Jer bol je preintenzivna.
So our body protects itself by going into shock.
I onda se tijelo štiti na taj način što prelazi u stanje šoka.
When somebody dies, we go into temporary shock.
Kad neko umre, mi prelazimo u privremeno stanje šoka.
And that's called denial.
A to se zove poricanje.
Because if I had to deal with all the reality of what that death meant, at one time I couldn't do it.
I ako trebam se suočiti sa tom svom realnošću u tom jednom trenutku, ja to ne mogu učiniti.
So denial is a temporary reaction
Tako da je poricanje privremena reakcija
to knowing that someone has died.
U spoznanju da je netko umro.
It doesn't mean I don't believe it.
To ne znači da ja to ne vjerujem.
Maybe I just don't feel it intensely
Možda ja to ne osjećam intenzivno.
yet.
Još, za sada.
I will.
Ali hoću.
You know, when I was a child, my dad was a pastor of our church when I
Kad
was
sam
growing up.
bio dijete i odrastao, moj tata je bio pastor u crkvi.
And that had its own set of problems I could talk about some other time.
I tata je imao određeni set problema, ali o tome mogu drugi put.
But what it did mean was that in our culture, churches would build the church building and then they would build a house next door to it for the pastor to live in.
U mojoj kulturi crkva bi izgradila zgradu, ali onda bi izgradila i kuću za pastora u blizini.
And so we were always living right next door to church.
I mi bi uvijek živjeli odmah pokraj crkvene zgrade.
Which meant I went to a lot of funerals.
Što je značilo da sam ja prisustvovao mnogim sprovodima.
Because my dad had to go.
Jer moj tata je morao ići.
And my mom had to go.
I moja mama je morala ići.
And they didn't dare leave me at home by myself.
A oni me nisu htjeli ostaviti doma samoga.
It was not healthy for me to be home by myself.
Jer nije bilo zdravo za mene da budem doma sam.
So I got dressed and went to the funeral too.
Tako da sam se ja obukao i išao na sprovod.
And one of the things that I remember hearing from a little boy all the way up to an adult.
I jedna od stvari koje sam slušao od kad sam bio mali dječak pa sve do svoje odrasle dobi
Is the statement, didn't she do well?
Je bila izjava za njoj nije bilo dobro.
She didn't cry at all during the funeral.
Ona uopće nije plakala za vrijeme sprovoda.
How strong he must be.
Kako snažan on mora biti.
You'd have never known that he lost his wife.
Ne bi nikad rekao da je izgubio suprugu.
And those statements came as a statement of, that's good.
I te izjave su dolazile kao izjave koje kažu da je dobro.
And that's our observation of someone being in denial.
I to je ono što promatramo, da je netko u poricanju.
Plus, we couldn't handle it if they weren't strong and didn't cry.
Jer mi ne bi mogli to podnijeti da neko nije snažan i da
So that's
plače.
our denial.
Tako da je to i naše poricanje.
But that's that numb feeling that we get. If you ever lost anybody close to you, you just feel numb for a while.
I to je taj tupi osjećaj kad ste izgubili nekoga.
You have episodes of sadness and tears, but then you make the tears go away and you're okay, and then they come again.
I tu su te epizode suza i tuge, ali onda ste u redu.
But denial is that gift that God gave us to say, you couldn't handle it all at one time. So I'm going to let you do it in little bitty pieces. So I'm going to give you some buffer here at the very beginning.
Poricanje je tu zato jer ne možeš to podnijeti sve odjednom, pa ono daje da to podnosimo u malim komadićima kroz vrijeme.
Now, a word of caution.
Riječ upozorenja.
Don't set up your tent at denial.
Nemojte postaviti svoj šator u poricanju.
It's a stage. It's something we go through. We don't plan to live there.
To je faza, nešto kroz što moramo proći, a ne da živimo u tome.
It's not healthy to live there.
I nije zdravo živjeti tamo.
And you have probably known people who've lost someone close to them who are still in denial.
I vjerojatno ste upoznali nekoga tko još uvijek živi u tom poricanju.
They've never gotten the blessing of healing.
Nikad nisu primili blagoslov iscjeljenja.
They're still stuck in denial.
Još uvijek su zapeli u poricanju.
Denial is a good place to start, but we don't want to stay there.
Poricanje je dobro mjesto za početi, ali nije dobro mjesto za ostati u njemu.
Now, the second stage of grieving and bereavement is anger.
A druga faza žalovanja je ljutnja.
Now, that may seem strange to come early in the grieving cycle.
To je možda čudno da tako brzo dolazi u tom procesu žalovanja.
So, what do we get angry about? What do you think we get angry about?
I zbog čega smo mi ljuti?
It's okay to talk about it.
U
It
redu je,
doesn't sound good, but it's okay to talk about it.
možda neće zvučati dobro, ali dobro je razgovarati o tome.
You know, I can get really angry at the person who died.
Ja se mogu naljutiti na osobu koja je umrla.
How dare you leave me?
Kako se usuđuješ napustiti me?
We were just getting started.
Pa upravo smo započeli.
I had a patient 2 weeks ago who died.
Imao pacijenta koji je prije 2 tjedna umro.
And she and her husband had just retired from their jobs.
A ona i njezin muž su upravo bili ušli u mirovinu.
And they planned to travel the world. They saved their money, they got rid of their possessions, and they were just going to travel for the rest of their life.
I oni su štedjeli novac i oni su htjeli samo do kraja života putovati.
And sickness came,
I bolest je došla,
and death was there,
i smrt je došla.
and the surviving spouse was angry. How dare you die now? We have all these plans.
I supružnik je ostao ljut, pa kako si me mogao napustiti, imali smo sve te planove.
And then she was very sad that she was so angry at her dead husband.
I onda smo mi svi bili tužni što je ona bila bijesna na svog muža.
I shouldn't be angry at him, he's dead.
A ona, ja ne bi trebala biti ljuta, on je mrtav.
But I'm so angry.
Ali ipak sam ljuta.
If he wasn't dead, I would kill him.
A da nije mrtav, ja bi ga ubila.
How dare him do that?
Kako se usuđuje to mi učiniti?
And then we get angry at ourselves.
I onda postanemo ljuti na sebe.
Why couldn't I be the one who died?
Zašto nisam ja taj koji je
Instead
umro
of them?
umjesto njega?
I've lived my life.
Ja sam živio svoj život,
Their life just got started.
a njegov život je...
I'm mad. And I'm mad at God.
I
Why did you take him from me?
ljut sam i na Boga. Zašto si ga uzeo od mene?
So anger is always a response to loss.
I ljutnja je uvijek odgovor na gubitak.
It doesn't have to be over someone dying. You could lose anything and you'll get angry.
Ne mora biti samo vezano uz smrt, može biti vezano uz bilo što.
I was traveling in Odessa, in the southern part of Ukraine, 2 years ago.
Prije 2 godine putovao sam u Odesu, u Ukrajini.
And I lost my passport.
Izgubio sam svoju putovnicu.
At the opera.
U operi.
It's a beautiful opera.
Prekrasno kazalište.
And I lost my passport.
I izgubio sam svoju putovnicu.
And I was to leave the next morning to come home.
A trebao sam sljedeće jutro se vratiti kući.
And I had all kinds of thoughts. Oh, I've got to go to the consulate. I got to get a new passport. I got to get. It just went on and on. I got more and more and more angry.
I onda su mi došle te misli, moram ići u konzulat, moram putovnicu, moram sve te stvari da bi došao kući.
The natural response to loss of any kind is to get angry.
I prirodni odgovor na bilo koji gubitak je ljutnja.
But for that story, God sent an angel.
Ali za tu priču Bog je poslao anđela.
And she was a little 13, 14-year-old girl from Thailand.
I to je bila jedna 13-14 godina stara djevojčica iz Tajlanda.
And she was with the school group going to the opera.
I ona je bila sa grupom iz škole koji su išli u kazalište.
And when my passport fell out of my pockets, she picked it up.
I kada je moja putovnica pala iz džepa, onda je ona ga pokupila.
And she ran 2 blocks in the city to find me, to give me back my passport.
I ona je 2 ulice trčala kako bi me našla i dala mi moju putovnicu.
I was so grateful.
Bio sam toliko zahvalan.
But she just disappeared again, and I didn't get to say.
Ali
Thank
ona je odmah nestala i nisam joj stigao reći hvala.
I was so stuck in my anger, I couldn't even say thank you.
Bio sam toliko zapeo u svojoj ljutnji da nisam mogao reći hvala.
Well, if we lose anything, we're going to get angry. Especially if we lose someone, we're going to get angry.
I svi se možemo naljutiti kad nešto izgubimo, pogotovo ako izgubimo nekog.
Now, getting angry is natural.
Postati ljut je prirodno.
We can't avoid being angry.
I ne možemo izbjeći naljutiti se.
But you have total control over what you do with your anger.
Ali imaš potpunu kontrolu nad svojom ljutnjom.
Anger is a natural emotion.
Ljutnja je prirodna emocija.
Hitting someone or yelling at someone is not natural.
Nekoga udariti ili na nekoga vikati nije prirodno.
That's voluntary.
To je dobrovoljno.
We don't get to hurt someone because we're angry.
Ne trebamo nekoga povrijediti zato što smo ljuti.
But we can be angry. And you will be angry in grief.
Ali možemo biti ljuti, možete biti ljuti u žalosti.
But we have to be careful what we do with it when we're grieving.
I moramo biti oprezni što činimo sa tim dok žalujemo.
We don't want to have to repair other relationships because we were so angry at somebody else.
Ne trebamo onda zbog toga popravljati naše odnose zato jer smo bili ljuti na nekog.
And then the third stage of grief is bargaining.
Treća faza u žalovanju je pogađanje.
Now, what do you think that stage is about?
Što mislite o toj fazi?
Where we bargain.
Kad se pogađamo.
It's really kind of interesting to watch people bargain.
Interesantno je promatrati ljude kad se pogađaju.
They bargain with God a lot.
Oni se jako puno pogađaju sa Bogom.
You know, God, if you don't take me, if I don't die, I promise I'll act this way.
Kažu Bogu, ako mene ne uzmeš, onda ću se ja početi ponašati na ovaj način.
Now we got to be careful because sometimes we'll say, if he hadn't done so and so, he wouldn't have died. I promise I won't do that.
I moramo biti oprezni kada kažemo da on nije učinio to i to, onda on ne bi umro.
Now, God's great revenge is not to kill us.
Božja velika nije osveta njegova da nas ubije.
It just is not.
Jednostavno nije.
But the bargaining I go through is if only this, then this will happen. If I do this, then that will happen. What if I fill in the blank?
Znači, pogađanje, ako ovo i ovo učinim, onda će se ovo dogoditi. Ili ono i ono učinim i onda samo ispunite prazninu.
Now, part of the reason we go through that is because we feel very, very vulnerable when someone close to us dies.
Razlog je taj što smo vrlo ranjivi kada nam neko umre.
If they died, I can die.
Ako on umre, onda mogu i ja umreti.
Maybe my death is imminent too.
Možda je i moja smrt blizu.
I don't want to die.
A ja ne želim umreti.
So I'll make a bargain with you, God, or with somebody.
I ja ću se onda pogađati s tobom, Bože, ili s nekim.
It's a way to manipulate the feelings so I don't feel it so intensely.
I to je način manipuliranja osjećajima da nisu tako intenzivni.
Now, we have denial, where we get numb.
Znači imamo denial.
Get numb, just.
Znači da smo tupi, da poričemo.
And we get angry, which is it feels good.
I onda postajemo ljuti, što daje dobar osjećaj.
It's a lot of energy. If I don't have any energy and I want some, I just get angry and I have a lot of energy.
I ako imamo malo energije, a kad postanemo ljuti, onda odjednom dobijemo puno energije.
And then I go, oh, wait minute, God, wait a minute, let's talk about this a little bit.
I onda dođemo do te faze kada kažemo, Bože, čekaj malo.
And then the fourth stage is when the bottom drops out. When the bottom falls out.
Aha, znači četvrta faza je kada izgubimo tlo pod nogama.
And I get depressed.
I ja postanem deprimiran.
And I don't know about you, but I don't like being depressed.
A ne znam za vas, ali ja ne volim biti deprimiran.
It doesn't feel good.
Jer to nije dobar osjećaj.
I don't eat well.
Ja ne jedem dobro.
I don't sleep well.
Ne spavam dobro.
I'm hard to get along with.
Teško mi je biti sam sa sobom.
Nothing is positive.
Ništa nije pozitivno.
It's just a sad time.
I to je tužno vrijeme.
Now this is a place, along with anger, that if we're not careful, we can camp out here.
I to je isto kao sa ljutnjom, možemo početi kampirati u toj fazi.
This is the stage where we really come to grips with the fact that our loved one is gone.
I ta faza je kada mi dolazimo do te činjenice da smo izgubili voljene.
Now, I have a really good friend whose wife died on Christmas Day 2 years ago.
Imam prijatelja kojem je žena umrla na Božić prije 2 godine.
She wasn't sick.
Nije bila bolesna.
She just had a heart attack and died.
Imala je srčani udar i jednostavno je umrla.
And unfortunately that happens a lot.
I nažalost to se događa često.
But on Christmas Day, it was hard.
Ali na Božićni dan to je bilo teško.
Because every Christmas from that point on, he is going to remember that's the day.
Jer svaki Božić od tada on će se sjećati
That Sarah Beth died.
Da je Sarah Beth umrla.
This last year, he had a really hard time at Christmas.
Prošle godine je imao jako teško vrijeme za vrijeme Božića.
Now, his name is Clay. Clay is a clever man.
Njegovo ime je Clay. I on je pametan čovjek.
He went to counseling.
Išao je na savjetovanje.
He joined a group of grief people.
On se priključio grupi, savjetodavnoj grupi
Other people
za
had
žalovanje.
lost people in their life.
Znači ljudi koji su izgubili svoje bližnje.
So he was doing all the right things.
I on je činio sve ispravno.
But when the first Christmas came along,
ali kad je prvi Božić došao,
he got so sad and so depressed that he didn't come out of it until Easter.
I on je toliko postao tužan i deprimiran da nije izašao iz toga sve do Uskrsa.
Prior to that, I could say, Clay, let's go get a cup of coffee. Let's talk about Sarah Beth and how much you miss her and how you're doing.
Prije toga pozvao bi ga, ajmo na kavu pa ćemo razgovarati o Sarah Beth i to sam mogao učiniti.
Let's see how, let's go somewhere, let's just get out and do something.
Ajmo izaći van i ajmo nešto učiniti.
And he would do it.
I on bi to učinio.
He also would tell me when he had enough.
I također bi mi rekao kad mu je bilo dosta.
But after Christmas,
ali nakon tog Božića
he wouldn't take my phone calls.
Ne bi odgovarao na moje pozive.
He wouldn't come to church.
Ne bi dolazio u crkvu.
He just stayed in his house.
Samo bio u svojoj kući.
He got depressed.
I bio deprimiran.
And it was real hard to live with that sadness.
I vrlo je teško bilo živjeti sa tom tugom.
Christmas is coming up again.
A Božić ponovo dolazi.
And he and I have talked a lot.
I on i ja smo jako puno razgovarali.
This last year about the second Christmas.
U protekloj godini od zadnjeg Božića.
And so he and my family are going to get together and we're going to celebrate Sarah Beth's life.
I on i ja i cijela obitelj, mi ćemo se sastati i proslavit ćemo smrt Sarah Beth.
He's going to cry.
I on će plakati.
I'm going to cry.
Ja ću plakati.
It's okay.
I to je u redu.
But we're going to celebrate.
Ali mi ćemo slaviti.
Because he's come to the last stage of his grief.
Jer je došao do zadnje faze svog žalovanja.
And that's acceptance.
A to je prihvaćanje.
Doesn't mean the sadness goes away.
To ne znači da tuga odlazi.
It doesn't mean he doesn't miss her.
To ne znači da joj on više, da mu ona više neće nedostajati.
But it doesn't mean I have accepted the fact that she has passed away.
Ali to znači da sam prihvatio činjenicu da je ona otišla.
She's not going to walk up the sidewalk into my house again.
Ona više nikada neće ući u kuću.
She's not going to answer the phone.
Više nikada neće odgovoriti na telefon.
She's gone.
Otišla je.
I miss her,
I nedostaje mi.
but she's gone.
Ali je otišla.
And that's a tough balance to come to,
I to je veliki teret.
but it's a healthy balance.
Ali to je zdravi teret.
And he asked me about 2 weeks ago,
I prije 2 tjedna me upitao.
he said, is it okay, you think, if I ask a lady friend to the movies?
Je li u redu da svoju prijateljicu pozovem u kino?
I said, as long as you don't buy 3 tickets.
Ja sam rekao, sve je u redu dok ne kupiš 3 karte.
One for you,
Jednu za sebe,
one for your lady friend,
jednu za tvoju prijateljicu,
and one for Sarah Beth.
a jednu za Sarah Beth.
She can't go to the movies with you.
A onda ona ne može ići s vama
And
u
then we
kino.
laughed. He knew I was teasing him.
I onda smo se smijali, on je znao da ga ja zafrkavam.
And then he said, is it okay if I tell her, if I go out on a date after 2 years, if I tell her about Sarah Beth?
I onda me upitao, je li u redu da ja toj prijateljici kažem o Sarah Beth nakon 2 godine?
And I said, Clay, I am not going to go out on a date with you.
Rekao sam mu, Clay, ja neću ići sa tobom na taj spoj.
But I would be very, very hurt if I did go with you and you did not tell me about Sarah Beth.
Ali ja bi bio povrijeđen da ti ideš sa mnom van u izlazak, a da mi ne kažeš ništa o Sarah Beth.
Because that tells me you're human.
Jer to mi govori da si čovjek.
That tells me that you have emotions.
Da imaš emocije.
And you cared about her.
I da ti je stalo do nje.
Acceptance is not giving up.
Prihvaćanje nije predaja.
Acceptance is saying, I understand the reality of the death, but I'm going to move on.
Prihvaćanje znači da prihvaćam realnost i nastavljam dalje.
Now, Sarah Beth, come on and go with me.
I sad, Sarah Beth, dođi sa mnom.
It's a hard place to be, but it's a very, very comforting place to be.
To je vrlo teško mjesto, ali je vrlo utješno.
Now, if in your life you're helping someone to learn to grieve,
ako pomažete nekome u njegovoj tuzi,
one of the goals that you'll be working toward is helping them get to the point of acceptance.
Jedan od ciljeva prema kojima ćete im pomagati da idu je da prihvaćaju.
And I've always asked the question, John, how long will it take before I get there?
I jedno od pitanja koje dobivam, koliko dugo će mi trebati da dođem do te točke?
And the answer is, it takes as long as it takes.
I odgovor je da će trajati koliko treba trajati.
Remember the slide we had? We had the straight line and this is how we want grief to work.
Sjetite se onog slajda, one slike, one linije, kako tuga djeluje.
But it works like this.
Ali u stvarnosti djeluje
how messy it is.
I koliko je to sve u neredu.
There are lots of factors that go into determining how long it takes us to grieve.
Ima jako mnogo faktora koji utječu na to koliko žalovanje traje.
Some of that is just our nature, how we're built.
Jedno od tih je naša sama priroda, kako smo izgrađeni.
Some of it is the relationship I had with the person who died.
Nešto ima i veze to što taj odnos koji smo izgradili u odnosu sa osobom.
If it's a friend that I only had for a couple of months and they die, I may feel sad, but I won't grieve near as long as I will if my wife passes away.
Ako imam prijatelja s kojim prijateljujem svega 2 mjeseca, mogu biti tužan, ali neću žalovati isto tako kao da izgubim suprugu.
Or the loss of my parents. I've been in their life all my life.
Ili gubitak mojih roditelja koje poznajem cijeli svoj život.
It takes a while to get over that.
I treba vremena da da to prođemo.
I'll tell you a funny story.
Ispričat ću vam smiješnu priču.
In my phone, just like in your phone, we have contacts, right?
U mom telefonu, kao i u vašem telefonu, imamo kontakte.
People's names and people's phone numbers and people's email address and sometimes their physical address are all in that contact list.
Znači, tamo imamo imena ljudi, brojeve, adrese, email adrese.
In my contact list, my mother never had a cell phone.
U mojem adresaru, moja mama nije nikada imala telefon.
She tried one time, but she was cell phone challenged. She could not work it.
A ona nije mogla raditi sa mobitelom.
Oh, she tried and tried, but she couldn't work it.
Pokušavala je, ali nije uspijevala.
She liked the old phone and put it to your ear and have
Ona
a
je
cord.
voljela stari telefon, slušalicu i staviti na uho.
My father, on the other hand,
A s druge strane, moj otac,
loved to pretend that he was pretty savvy, tech savvy.
a on se volio pretvarati da je tehnološki napredan.
He wasn't, but he thought he'd pretend to be.
A nije bio, ali on se pretvarao da je.
So he had a cell phone, a mobile phone.
I on je imao mobitel.
9 out of 10 times when he'd answer it, he'd hang it up.
I 9 od 10 puta kada bi odgovarao na poziv, on bi pustio slušalicu.
The time it took him to go click to hear, he'd hang up. Somehow he would disconnect.
Od tog trenutka kad bi kliknuo i do uha, on bi nekako to prekinuo vezu.
All the time. But in my contact list, I had his name and his phone number.
Ali u mom adresaru ja sam imao njegovo ime i njegov broj.
I knew I would never talk to him on his cell phone. I had to call the landline if I wanted to talk to him.
I znao sam da nikad neću ga dobiti putem mobitela, morao sam ga zvati kroz klasični telefon.
But I had his cell phone, his mobile phone number in my phone.
Ali ipak sam imao broj njegovog mobitela.
Now, my father passed away in February about 8 years ago.
Moj otac je umro u veljači prije nekih 8 godina.
And it was a sad time. He was not healthy, not well, and it was kind of a blessing that God called him home. He didn't have to suffer anymore.
I bilo je tužno, on je nije bio dobrog zdravlja, ali bilo je bio blagoslov što ga je Bog pozvao k sebi.
But it was sad when he died.
Ali bilo je tužno kad je umro.
I got to be with him when he passed away.
I uspio sam biti s njime dok je on umirao.
And we had the funeral and we grieved and we had the burial at the cemetery and my sisters went back to their lives and I went to my life.
I imali smo sprovod i žalovali smo. Moje sestre su se vratile u svoj život, ja u svoj.
And my sisters lived in the same town that he lived in.
A moje sestre su živjele u istom gradu gdje je on živio.
And I lived in Dallas, 100 miles, I don't know how many kilometers that is.
I ja sam živio u Dallasu koji je bio stotinama kilometara ili milja daleko.
That's good. And so I didn't see him every day like they did.
Tako da ga nisam mogao vidjeti svaki dan kao što su ga one mogle.
But it was about 3 or 4 months after we had his funeral.
Ali to je bilo nekih 3-4 mjeseca nakon njegovog sprovoda.
And my phone rang.
I moj telefon je zazvonio.
My mobile phone rang.
Mobitel.
And I picked it up and I looked at the caller ID.
I uzeo sam ga i pogledao sam kome zove.
And it was my father's name.
I tamo je bilo ime moga oca.
I went, what?
A ja sam se pitao što je ovo.
My dad's calling me?
Moj tata me zove.
He finally got the cell phone to work.
I napokon je uspio proraditi njegov mobitel.
And he's been dead for 4 months.
A već je mrtav 4 mjeseca.
And I started to answer it.
I odgovorio sam.
But I didn't.
Ali nisam.
I thought, what if he's not where I think he is?
Što ako on nije tamo gdje ja mislim da on jest?
I would hate for him to tell me that he didn't make it up there.
I bilo bi mi teško da on nije uspio otići tamo gore.
So I went into denial.
Tako da sam prešao u poricanje.
I couldn't answer the phone.
Nisam mogao se javiti na telefon.
Now there are 1000 reasons why that may have happened.
Postoje
Technologically.
1000 razloga zašto bi se to tehnološki moglo dogoditi.
but I will never quite forgive myself for not having the opportunity to talk to him 4 months later.
Ali nisam mogao zamisliti, propustiti tu priliku da razgovaram s njim.
If indeed he did call me.
Ako me uistinu je on zvao.
But true to my dad's demeanor,
ali vezano uz njegovo ponašanje, stav,
he never called back.
Nikad nije nazvao nazad.
So I took his name out of my contact list.
Tako da sam izbrisao njegovo ime iz adresara.
He's going to call somebody else if he wants to talk.
I on mora nazvati nekog drugog ako želi razgovarati.
But acceptance is that part where we go, it's finally over.
Ali prihvaćanje je ono mjesto gdje kažemo sad je gotovo, mogu nastaviti dalje.
Now, something will happen that will remind us intensely about that person.
Nešto će se dogoditi što će nas intenzivno podsjetiti na tu osobu.
It may be a phone call.
Može to biti telefonski poziv.
Maybe a holiday.
Možda praznik.
It may be music.
Možda glazba.
That was our favorite song.
Neka omiljena pjesma.
It may be a smell of a holiday.
Možda miris praznika.
It may be somebody brings it up in a conversation.
Ili netko spomene u razgovoru.
And I will feel intensely sad.
I ja ću doživjeti tu intenzivnu tugu.
But I don't live there anymore, and I move quickly back to acceptance again.
Ali više ne živim u tome i vrlo brzo ću se vratiti u prihvaćanje.
So that's why we had the 5 stages. We've watched and we've looked and we've observed. This is how God put it in us to grieve naturally.
I zato imamo tih 5 faza koje je Bog stavio nas da prirodno tugujemo.
Now, there are several different kinds of grief.
Ima više vrsta tugovanja.
One is called ambiguous grief.
Jedno je nazvano
Is it up there?
Dvoznačno žalovanje.
That's what it says, right?
Dvoznačno.
It says ambiguous grief.
Ambiguous.
That's what the word is.
It is.
Yes.
I'm on the right slide. That's
Yes,
my question.
yes.
I guess I should
Yes.
ask the question I really mean.
I'm
Okay,
just,
good. Ambiguous means that I'm really not sure about what's going on.
To znači da nismo sigurni što se događa.
It feels like grief.
Osjećamo kao žalost,
But I'm not very sad.
ali ja nisam jako tužan.
Or I'm very sad and I shouldn't be sad.
Ili sam jako tužan, ali ne bi trebao biti.
And it's real ambiguous and I just don't know where I sit in all this anymore.
Ali nije jasno, ne znam gdje sam u tome.
And then we have a grief called latent grief.
I onda imamo skriveno žalovanje.
And that means it's hidden from us.
To znači da je ono skriveno od nas.
It's kind of under the surface somewhere, but I can't quite put my finger on it.
Negdje se nalazi tu ispod površine, ali nigdje to ne mogu dohvatiti.
Now, the good thing about latent grief is it will come out.
Dobra stvar kod skrivenog žalovanja je da će ono s vremenom izaći.
It's kind of like a splinter.
To je nešto poput trna.
Eventually, the splinter will come to the surface.
S vremenom trn izađe van.
So we know it's there, but we don't feel it.
Znamo da je tu negdje, ali ne osjećamo.
We want to feel it, but this kind of grief is just called latent grief.
Želimo da to osjećamo i to nazivamo skrivenim žalovanjem.
And then we have a kind of grief called multiple losses.
I onda imamo višestruke gubitke.
And this is where I had several deaths at one time.
I to je ono kad sam imao više odjednom.
Now, this is what we're experiencing a lot during the pandemic.
To je ono što smo dosta proživljavali kroz pandemiju.
I've heard story after story of the fact that my father died, and a week later my mother died, and then my sister died.
I imali smo priče o tome kako je i moj otac umro, moja majka, sestra umrla.
Or there's an automobile accident.
Ili je bila automobilska nesreća.
And several people that were close to us died at one time.
I nekoliko ljudi koji su bili bliski nama su umrli.
And the grief question that comes to us is, which one do I grieve first?
I onda nam dolazi to pitanje sa čime ću se prvo složiti.
What do I do first?
Što da prvo činim?
It's not about who you love the most.
I to nije stvar u tome koga se više voli.
It's not a sign that if you grieve one person that you don't love the other person.
I to nije ako žalujemo za jednom osobom da ne volimo drugu.
It's the fact that it's overwhelming.
Nego se radi o činjenici da nas to preplavljuje.
And then we have what we call stigmatized loss.
I onda imamo stigmatizirani gubitak.
And that's the kind of loss that when it happens,
I to je gubitak kada se dogodi.
People make judgments about it.
Onda ljudi osuđuju.
And we experienced this on kind of a global or cultural level years and years ago when HIV/AIDS first came on the scene.
I to smo na globalnom nivou radili kada se prvi put pojavio HIV.
Because it was not uncommon for us, even good Christian people, to say it's their fault they died.
I to nije bilo rijetko i za nas kršćane da smo znali reći pa oni su zaslužili da im se to dogodi.
And if I heard one, I heard several times, if they just weren't sinners like they were, they wouldn't have died.
I nekoliko puta, više puta sam čuo koji su rekli da nisu bili takvi grešnici ne bi umrli.
Now nothing is further from the truth than that.
Ali ništa nije dalje od istine nego to.
But stigmatized death is a death that occurs around something that we have invested a negative to.
Ali ta stigmatizirana smrt je nešto što imamo negativni pristup.
Now, I don't know how it is here in Croatia, but at home in the U.S., the COVID pandemic has become very, very political.
Ne znam kako je u Hrvatskoj, ali u Americi oko ove COVID pandemije to se pretvorilo u političko pitanje.
And I've heard people say, if he had just worn his mask, he would not have died.
I čuo sam ljude koji kažu da je barem nosio masku, ne bi umro.
If he had just gotten vaccinated, he wouldn't have died.
Ili da se barem cijepio, ne bi umro.
If he hadn't gone to that party or that wedding or that funeral, he wouldn't have died.
Ili da barem nije išao na taj parti ili na to vjenčanje ili čak i na taj sprovod, ne bi umro.
And the issue is not whether they did something or didn't do something.
A stvar nije u tome jesu li nešto učinili ili nisu učinili.
The issue is that they died.
Stvar je u tome da su umrli.
And we get to grieve their loss.
I moramo žalovati njihov gubitak.
We can struggle with the reasons.
Možemo se boriti sa bilo kojim
But
razlozima.
stigmatized grief is when I put some kind of invested energy into something other than the loss itself.
I taj stigmatizirana žalost je kada uložim svoju energiju in something.
If I invest in something other than the loss.
Kada uložim u nešto što je nešto drugo od tog gubitka.
And the last kind of grief is anticipatory grief.
Zadnje je predviđeno žalovanje.
Now this is a grief that a lot of us go through naturally when we know someone is going to die.
I to je žalovanje koje prirodno prolazimo kada znamo da će netko umreti.
They're very sick.
Oni su vrlo bolesni.
The doctor says we don't have long.
I doktor je rekao da oni neće biti dugo s nama.
And so I began then to do my grieving. I go into denial.
I onda počinjemo sa žalovanjem, idemo u negiranje.
I get angry.
I onda postajem ljut.
I begin to bargain a little bit.
Onda se počinjem pogađati.
I get depressed.
I onda uđem u depresiju.
I don't ever get to acceptance in anticipatory grief though. I don't get to acceptance, that stage in anticipatory grief.
Aha, ne dolazim do prihvaćanja.
But I feel like I've done a lot of grieving before they die.
Ali činim puno žalovanja prije nego što umru.
Now, the tricky part of that kind of grief is I get to grieve all over again when they pass away.
Tu je jedna začkoljica, a što moram opet proći taj cijeli proces žalovanja kada oni umru.
So grieving is a natural process. There are all different kinds of grief. It's natural to grieve.
Postoje razni procesi, ali prirodno je žalovati.
Now, this next slide is a reality slide, okay?
A ovaj sljedeći slajd je slajd realnosti.
So let's look at it and let's talk about it for just a second.
Gledajmo ga i razgovaramo o tome.
Grief is really about turning inward and recalibrating and thinking.
Žalovanje je zapravo u svezi s okretanjem prema unutra i s usmjeravanjem i mišljenjem, kalibriranjem.
This is not the way the world is anymore, and I need to accept it or adapt to it.
Svijet više nije takav kakav je bio i ja to moram prihvatiti.
Now, this is a harsh but true statement.
Ovo je oštra, ali istinita izjava.
So let's think about it for just a moment and talk about it for just a moment.
I ajmo razmišljati malo o tome za trenutak.
If we can get the emotion out of the way,
Kada bi mogli emociju maknuti sa strane,
and we can't,
a ne možemo,
but if we could,
ali kada bi mogli,
the reality is that part of my life is over.
Stvarnost je da taj dio mog života je gotov.
That part of my life that I had them in it, whoever died,
taj dio života, koga god da sam imao u svom životu,
that part is over and it will never be back again.
Taj dio mog života je završio i više se nikad neće vratiti.
And that's pretty harsh.
A to je oštro, grubo.
And it's easier to see and to say we talk about someone passing away or someone dying.
I lakše nam je govoriti o tome da je neko otišao ili umro.
But let's get back to our topic that we started out with.
Ali vratimo se na svoju temu s kojom smo započeli.
And let me say something and then you can do with it as you choose.
I dopustite mi da nešto kažem, a vi onda učinite s tim što želite.
We will never ever have a world the same as it was before the pandemic.
Mi nikada više nećemo imati isti onaj svijet kakav je bio prije pandemije.
It will never go back to be the way it was.
Više neće nikad biti onako kakav je bio prije toga.
And I don't like that.
I meni se to ne sviđa.
I had some things I wanted to do and some things I wanted to accomplish.
I ima stvari koje sam ja htio napraviti i postići.
And some of those opportunities are just gone.
I neke od tih prilika su nestale.
Part of it is I don't have the time or the age or the energy to start over again and pursue it.
Ja više nemam niti vremena, niti energije da bi opet stvari pokrenuo.
That's a harsh reality.
I to je gruba stvarnost.
But for all of us, we will be better off if we grieve the losses that occurred during and in the middle of the pandemic like we are now still.
Ali bilo bi bolje za nas da žalujemo za tim gubicima za vrijeme pandemije.
Instead of wishing that it could go back to where it was, deciding what will I do now to make my world a better place.
A ne da stalno želimo da bude sve kao prije. I bolje da odlučimo što sada mogu učiniti najbolje i kako da učini svijet boljim.
I think that is part of our Christian existence. Is we have to go forward.
I to je dio našeg kršćanskog postojanja, da želimo ići naprijed.
When I was a child, I hated to go to family reunions.
Kao dijete ja sam mrzio obiteljska okupljanja.
Partly because there were no cousins my age.
Djelomično zbog toga jer nije bilo bratića mojih godina.
And all I heard the adults talk about was, remember when in the good old days we did this and we did that.
A stariji su stalno govorili, sjeti se vremena nekada kako je bilo dobro, radili smo ovo ili ono.
I know the good old days they grew up in. World War I, World War II, global depression.
A znam njihova stara vremena. To je bio Prvi svjetski rat, Drugi svjetski rat, Velika depresija.
Those weren't good old days.
I to nisu bili dobri stari dani.
I don't want to go through that.
A ja ne želim kroz to prolaziti.
But that's all I heard. If we could just go back to the good old days.
Ali samo sam to čuo, kad bi se mogli vratiti u ta vremena.
Now, there are only a few of us in this room tonight.
Ima nas svega nekoliko u ovoj sobi.
But I hope that we can pledge with each other that we will move forward and not reminisce all the time about the good old days before the pandemic.
Ali nadam se da se možemo zavjetovati jedni drugima da ćemo ići naprijed iza ove pandemije.
It will get in our way every time of things going forward.
It will
get in our way. It'll become an obstacle.
Ona će nam biti prepreka u budućnosti.
You know, the Bible teaches us in 1 Thessalonians.
Biblija nas uči u prvoj Solunjanima.
And I'll let you just go ahead and read it, because there's no need us reading it twice.
Nećemo da budete u neznanju, braćo, o onima koji su usnuli, da ne tugujete kao drugi koji nemaju nade. Doista, ako vjerujemo da je Isus umro i uskrsnuo, onda će Bog i one koji usnuše u Isusu privesti zajedno s njime.
If we believe in God and we believe in Christ, then everything is in the future. It's not in the past.
Ako vjerujemo u Boga i vjerujemo u Krista, onda se sve nalazi u budućnosti.
And Paul says in 2 Corinthians, a second verse.
A Pavle kaže u 2. Korinčanima, blagoslovljen Bog i Otac Gospodina našega Isusa Krista, Otac milosrđa i Bog svake utjehe. On nas tješi u svakoj našoj nevolji, da bismo i mi sve koji su u nevolji mogli tješiti onom utjehom kojom nas same tješi Bog.
If we believe, if we truly believe in God, then we know that tomorrow is going to be better than today.
Ako istinski vjerujemo u Boga, onda znamo da će sutrašnji dan biti bolji nego današnji.
And today was better than yesterday.
A današnji dan je bio bolji nego jučerašnji.
And the way we get through this pandemic, and the way we get through our losses and our grief, is to say, I've got to go forward.
I način na koji trebamo prolaziti kroz naše gubitke i kroz ovu pandemiju je da će sutrašnji dan biti bolji.
Now we don't know what it's going to be like when there's no more pandemic.
Mi ne znamo kako će to biti kada više neće biti pandemije.
We're not there yet.
Još nismo tamo.
We're close, I hope.
I nadam se da se približavamo tome.
But my thinking is, and my training as a scientist is, that we will always have a form of COVID in our world.
Ali moje znanje i iskustvo kao stručnjaka je da ćemo imati COVID u nekom obliku.
It's always been here, and now it'll always be, we'll just know what to do with it this time.
Uvijek imali smo ga prije, ali za sada ćemo barem znati kako se nositi s njime.
Every year my doctor in the fall says to me, now that I've become more mature,
i meni moj doktor kaže svake jeseni, sada kada sam u zrelim godinama,
he says, have you had your pneumonia shot?
Jesi li dobio svoju injekciju za upalu pluća?
Have you had your shingles shot?
Shingles.
It's a rash that you get, like chicken pox.
Za ospice, ili tako nešto, cijepivo.
Have you had your flu shot?
Jesi li za gripu dobio cijepivo?
Have you had any other shots?
Jesi li neke druge cijepiva uzeo?
And now he's going to say, have you had your COVID shot?
I sad će samo govoriti, jesi dobio i za COVID cijepivo?
You know, years ago, I didn't have to have a flu shot.
Godinama prije nisam dobio cijepivo za gripu, ali sada dobio.
I didn't have to have a pneumonia shot, but now I do.
I nisam trebao za upalu pluća, a sad imam.
I didn't have to have a shingle shot, but now I do.
Nisam trebao za ospice, ali sad trebam.
I didn't have to have a COVID shot, but now I do.
I nisam trebam za COVID, a sad trebam.
What are we going to do with it?
I što ćemo učiniti s tim?
How will the next stage be? And that's up to us.
I koja je sljedeća faza? To je ovisi o nama.
And that's up to us to help our friends and our family know to move forward, not to live in the past.
I to trebamo i sa prijateljima obitelji znati da živimo prema naprijed, a ne u prošlosti.
Because the world as we knew it is no longer going to be.
Jer svijet kakvim smo ga poznavali više se neće vratiti.
It will no longer be easy to walk through an airport.
I više neće biti lako samo ući na aerodrom.
It will no longer be easy to go to town on the tram without wearing a mask.
I više neće biti samo tako lako ući u tramvaj ili u grad bez maske.
Just going to be life.
I to će biti naš život.
And part of our grieving is coming to that level of acceptance. I don't like it.
I dio tog žalovanja je da dođemo do tog prihvaćanja. Ne mora mi se to sviđati.
But acceptance is not about liking.
Jer prihvaćanje ne znači da mi se to mora sviđati.
It's about reality.
To je stvar o realnosti.
I want to get to this one slide. You know, sometimes in our Christian experience, especially when we have losses and death and illness and all those things that we mentioned that the pandemic took away from us, security and all that stuff.
I ponekad u našem kršćanskom iskustvu kada doživljavamo i tu smrt i te gubitke i pandemiju i ono što nam je pandemija uzela,
we began to feel a little bit like we're stuck between Job and Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Osjećamo kao da smo zapeli između Joba i Marije, majke Isusove.
Remember Job's questions?
Sjećate li se Jobovih pitanja?
And the questions of his friends and his wife?
I pitanja njegovih prijatelja i njegove žene.
Job, what did you do wrong, buddy?
Jobe, što si to učinio krivo?
Did you sin against God?
Sagriješio si protiv Boga?
Did you not pay your taxes?
Nisi platio svoje poreze?
Did you not visit your sick mother? The questions, we don't know all the answers.
Nisi posjetio svoju bolesnu majku? Pitanja koja mi postavljamo.
But the answer was always the same. Curse God and die.
Ali odgovor je bio uvijek isti. Prokuni Boga i umri.
Just say I'm tired of it and just die.
Jobe, reci samo umoran sam od ovoga i samo umri.
Did you ever ask the question, what did I do wrong? Why is my security taken away?
Se postavili pitanje što sam učinio krivo?
Why can't I buy candy like I used to be able to buy at the store?
Zašto ne mogu kupovati slatkiše u dućanu kao što sam to radio prije?
Why did all this happen? Is it something I did?
Ja, zašto se sve ovo događa? To zbog toga što sam ja nešto učinio?
If it is something you did to cause the pandemic, then I want to talk to you a little bit.
Ja, ako si ti učinio nešto zbog čega si prouzrokovao pandemiju, onda želim razgovarati s tobom.
I have some things I want to say.
I ima stvari koje ti želim ako je to tvoja krivnja.
It's not your fault.
Ali nije to tvoja krivnja.
We're like Job.
Mi smo poput Joba.
We question and we're told to question.
Mi postavljamo pitanja i govore nam pitanja.
And then we become like Mary at the foot of the cross, the day that Jesus died.
I onda postajemo poput Marije ispod križa.
Can you even imagine what it was like?
Možete li zamisliti
to be her that day?
Kako je biti ona na njenom mjestu u tom danu?
Remember how that started?
Sjetite se kako je to započelo.
She got a visit from the angel.
Ona je dobila posjet od anđela.
We say, Mary, blessed of all women.
Mario, blagoslovljena među svim ženama.
You're going to be the mother of God.
Ti ćeš biti majkom Božjom.
I don't know what she was thinking or what she was feeling as a young teenage girl.
Ja ne znam što je ona razmišljala ili osjećala kao jedna tineđerka.
But just to have an angel visit you was one thing.
Samo imati posjet anđela, to je jedna stvar.
But to lay that on you,
ali
to be overwhelming.
To jednostavno staviti na tebe, to je bilo preplavljujuće.
And who do you tell?
And who
do you go tell that happened to you?
I kome to reći? Što ti se dogodilo?
You go find Elizabeth, your cousin, in the next village and you tell her because no one else will believe it.
I onda idem naći sestričnu Elizabetu u susjedno selo, jer ko će mi drugi vjerovati?
And then you give birth to this little baby and you raise him the best you can.
I onda rodiš dijete i onda ga odgojiš najbolje što možeš.
And you understand that he is the son of God.
I onda razumiješ da on jest sin Božji.
And then you're at the foot of the cross looking up and saying, what did I do wrong?
I onda si ispod križa i pitaš se što sam to krivo učinila.
If I just raised him differently, maybe.
I da sam ga možda drugačije odgojila, možda.
As mothers and as fathers, what goes through your mind when you think, this is what he was supposed to do?
I kao očevi i majke zapitate se što ste mogli drugačije učiniti.
And how she must have grieved that day, and those days later.
Koliko je tugovala u tim danima nakon toga.
But somewhere, you and I are between those two Bible characters.
Ali ti i ja smo negdje između ta dva biblijska lika.
Either in the grief that's happened to us during the pandemic, or in the grief that just happens naturally in the loss of someone.
Ili radili se o tuzi zbog pandemije ili u tuzi zbog gubitka nekoga.
Now, Niemeyer, who's a philosopher, says this.
Niemeyer je filozof koji je ovako rekao: sposobni smo izgubiti mjesta, projekte, imanje, zanimanja i sve one projekcije kojima smo snažno povezani. Pandemija nas sili da se suočimo s lomljivošću takvih povezanosti. Bila to naša obližnja, knjižnica ili kafić, ili rutine koje nas održavaju kroz dan. Njima nedostaje jasnoća i nisu definirane do kraja, kao što to smrt jest.
That we lose places and we have to feel our own frailty.
Mi gubimo mjesta i moramo osjetiti svoju lomljivost.
One of the things that the pandemic has done, it has taught us all how vulnerable we are.
I ono što nas je pandemija naučila jest koliko smo mi ranjivi.
I didn't plan to get COVID 2 years ago.
Prije 2 godine ja nisam planirao dobiti COVID.
It wasn't on my list
To nije bilo na mojoj listi.
of things I wanted to do before I died.
Od onih stvari koje želim učiniti prije svoje smrti.
In fact, I hadn't even heard of it before.
A čak i za to nisam niti čuo ikad prije.
I was in Ukraine,
Bio sam u Ukrajini.
and my wife called and said, there's a virus that's around the world now. You may not have heard of it in Ukraine, but you have to come home.
I nazvala me žena i rekla, možda još nisi čuo, ali postoji, kreće se virus po svijetu koji je težak i onda moraš se vratiti što prije.
So somewhere between that phone call and the 3 days it took me to get home, I caught COVID.
I ta 3 dana od tog poziva pa do mog povratka kući ja sam dobio COVID.
I don't know if it was on the train, on the plane, in Kiev, in Frankfurt, in Chicago, in Houston, in Dallas. I don't know where it was, but someone shared it with me.
Ne znam je li to bilo na vlaku, na avionu, u Kijevu, Frankfurtu, Chicago ili gdje god, ali netko mi je to podijelio.
And all I know is I understood real fast how vulnerable and how frail I was.
I vrlo brzo sam naučio koliko sam ranjiv i lomljiv.
Now I'm a big strong man,
Ja sam veliki snažan čovjek,
and that disease took me to my knees.
a ta bolest me spustila na koljena.
I have a different perspective of life now than I had before.
I imam sada drugačiju perspektivu na život.
And that's what Niemeyer is telling us, that one thing we know about the pandemic is it brought us all to the reality of we're just one breath away.
I to je ono što je Niemeyer govori, da nas je pandemija naučila da smo samo jedan udah daleko od smrti.
And I mean literally one breath away from us being the one that someone is grieving and mourning.
Jedan udah daleko od onih koji žaluju za nama.
So what do we do? Where do we hang our mask?
I što da učinimo? Gdje da objesimo naše maske?
It's going to be our companion for a long time.
A ona će biti naš suputnik dugo vremena.
And my Christian faith tells me to hang the mask on the cross.
A meni govori da tu masku objesimo na križ.
Wear a mask. I will always wear my mask.
Nosite masku, ja ću uvijek nositi svoju masku.
But I have to embrace it as a part of my humanity now.
ali moram je prihvatiti kao dio svoje ljudskosti,
and not curse it because of its annoyance to me.
a ne kao prokletstvo zato jer mi
And
smeta.
I can't breathe, and I don't like the way it feels, and
Zato jer ne mogu disati ili ne osjećam se dobro.
I can't hear anybody, and I can't understand anything. I don't like it.
Ne mogu razumjeti, ne mogu dobro čuti nikoga, ne sviđa mi
It
se.
doesn't matter.
To nije bitno.
Now, how do we cope? Let me just give you a few things and then we'll be finished here.
A kako da se borimo s time? Daću vam par stvari pa ćemo završiti.
We understand that what we have to go through if we're going to get well
Ako
in our
želimo
grieving in our mourning.
biti dobro uslijed našeg žalovanja,
And those stages are predictable.
i te faze su predvidljive.
How they come and how long they last we can't predict, but they will come in somewhat that order.
Koliko dugo one traju, to ne možemo predvidjeti, ali znamo u kojem redoslijedu će doći.
So how do I cope with all that?
I kako da se nosim sa time?
The first thing I do is I learn to name it. Call it what it is.
Prvo je imenovanje, da pridam ime tome.
It's death.
To je smrt,
It's finality.
konačnost.
It's over. It's different.
Gotovo je, drugačije je.
And then I have to validate it.
A onda moram to potvrditi.
It absolutely is happening.
To se apsolutno događa.
It's not my imagination.
To više nije moja imaginacija.
It will not be different tomorrow.
Neće biti drugačije sutra.
And then I have to grieve. I have to mourn.
A onda trebam žalovati.
And then here's what I encourage you to do. Learn how to celebrate the good things that you experienced.
A onda proslavi dobro one stvari koje si iskusio.
My wife still makes the same pie my grandmother made.
Moja žena radi onu istu vrstu pite koju je moja baka radila.
It tastes just as bad now as it did when she made it.
I jednako loš okus ima kao što je baka to radila.
And we don't fix the pie because we like the way it tastes.
I ne želimo popraviti tu pitu zbog toga što ona tako ima ukus.
We fix the pie to celebrate her life.
Odnosno mi radimo tu pitu zato da bi proslavili život.
Thank goodness she wasn't defined as a good cook.
Hvala Bogu da nije bila definirana kao dobar kuhar.
But we celebrate the good. We learn to celebrate the good and all the things that have gone on.
Ali naučimo slaviti ono što je bilo dobro.
And then we begin to set up a new routine.
I onda postavljamo novu rutinu.
You know, the routine at my house before COVID was if I wanted to go somewhere, I got my book, because I always take my book with me in case I have a chance to read. I took my keys, and I get in my car and I go somewhere.
Rutina je prije COVID-a je bila da bi uvijek uzeo knjigu, ako imam priliku negdje čitati knjigu, ključeve, keys and auto.
And now I check to see, is the place open that I'm going to or is it closed down?
A sada provjeravam je li to mjesto kamo idem otvoreno ili zatvoreno.
Do I have my mask with me?
Imam li masku sa sobom?
Do I have plenty of gasoline in my car in case I run out? I might not be able to buy any more.
Imam li dovoljno benzina u autu jer ako mi nestane benzina, hoću li to moći napuniti?
I have a whole new routine.
Imam potpuno novu rutinu.
And that routine makes life feel normal again.
I ta rutina čini da se osjećam da je život opet normalan.
The next thing is take care of yourself.
A sljedeće je da se brineš o sebi.
And I mean that in the most primary and elementary way you can.
A to mislim na onaj najelementarniji način.
Get plenty of rest.
Puno se odmare.
Eat healthy.
Jedi zdravo.
Get some exercise.
I vježbaj.
Engage with your friends and your social circles.
I odnosno održavaj prijateljstva i svoj društveni krug.
Take care of yourself.
Brini se za sebe.
The next one is avoid comparing.
Sljedeće je izbjegni uspoređivanje.
It's like going to my old family reunion. Remember the good old days.
Kad se sjetim svojih obiteljskih okupljanja i sjećanja na dobra stara vremena.
It's okay to remember things.
U redu je sjećati se stvari.
But be careful that we don't say it was better back then than it is now.
Ali budite pažljivi kad govorite bilo je bolje prije nego sada.
If it's not better, I challenge you to make it better.
Ako nije bolje, onda vas izazivam da učinite da bude bolje.
And then I encourage you to lean on your friends.
I potičem vas da se oslonite na prijatelje.
One of the things I experienced, and I'm guessing you did too, is how much I missed my really good friends.
I ono što znam je da koliko mi nedostaju moji prijatelji.
Now, we can talk to them on the phone.
Možemo s njima razgovarati na telefon.
I can see my grandkids through Facebook, FaceTime.
Ja mogu preko tableta gledati, vidjeti svoje unuke.
But I couldn't hug them and I couldn't touch them.
Ali ne mogu ih zagrliti, ne mogu ih dodirnuti.
Take good care of your good friends and your family.
Dobro se brinite za svoje prijatelje i rodbinu.
Lean on them when things are not going well.
Oslonite se na njih kad stvari ne idu dobro.
Celebrate with them when things are going really well.
A proslavljate kada stvari idu dobro.
And then the last thing is seek support.
I zadnje je traži potporu, podršku.
If you get stuck in one of those stages of grief and you cannot get out,
ako zapnete u nekoj od ovih faza žalovanja i ne možete izaći iz toga,
find someone to talk to.
Nađite nekoga s kim možete razgovarati.
You don't have to go see a psychologist.
Ne morate ići posjetiti psihologa.
Find someone who understands, who's been that way before.
Nađite nekoga koji to razumije, bio je već u tome.
And all you have to say is, I'm stuck.
I sve što trebate reći je, ja sam zapeo.
I can't get out of the anger.
I ne mogu izaći iz te ljutnje.
I can't get out of the depression.
Ne mogu izaći iz te depresije.
What do I do?
Što da činim?
Get help.
Potraži pomoć.
And then remember that there is always hope.
I onda se sjeti da je uvijek nada.
There is always hope.
I uvijek postoji nada.
There's an old hymn that says, my faith is built on nothing less.
Ima jedna stara pjesma, moja vjera nije izgrađena ništa manjemu.
Than the hope we have in our God and our Savior.
Nego nadu koju imamo u našeg spasitelja.
You know, hope is a verb and not a noun.
A nada je glagol, a ne imenica.
We want to make it a noun. We want to make it something.
Mi to želimo učiniti imenicom, nečime.
But it really is something that we're doing.
Ali to je zapravo nešto što činimo.
I challenge you to be that one little blade of grass or leaf or flower that finds the crack in the pavement and grows.
Dajem vam taj izazov da vi budete taj mali cvjetak između koje je našo pukotinu između tog kamenja.
That's a sign of your hope.
I to je znak vaše nade.
I can do it.
Ja to mogu.
How many times we've read our children's stories about you can do it, you can do it.
Koliko puta smo čuli dječje priče, ja to mogu, ja to mogu.
You can do it.
I ti to možeš.
And then when it is all said and done,
I kada je sve to izvršeno,
then we'll all live in hope together.
Onda ćemo svi živjeti u nadi zajedno.
And the ray of sunshine will come through our hearts again.
I zraka sunca će doći u naš život.
And then will be a better tomorrow.
I onda će biti bolje sutra.
It'll be different.
Biće drugačije.
But it'll be better.
Ali bit će bolje.
Now, let me see if you have any questions.
Sada da vidim da li imate kakvih pitanja.
It's always a good sign or a bad sign.
Šutnja je uvijek i dobar i loš znak.
Thank you for letting me spend some time with you tonight.
Hvala vam što ste mi dozvolili da provedem vrijeme sa vama.
It's been a pleasure to be back here and be back at this wonderful place.
Zadovoljstvo je biti ponovo ovdje na ovom mjestu.
and to renew old friendships and meet new people.
I obnoviti stara prijateljstva i upoznati nove ljude.
And my wish for you and hope for you is that you have a wonderful day tomorrow.
I moja želja je da imate divan dan sutra.
You know, I teach a lot of college students.
Ja podučavam mnogo studenata.
And the older I get, the younger they get for some reason. I haven't figured that out.
I što sam više ja stariji, to su oni sve mlađi i to nikako još ne mogu
They're
shvatiti.
just little children now. They weren't 20 years ago.
I oni više nisu mala djeca kao prije 20 godina.
But at the end of every class,
Ali na kraju svakog predavanja
I tell them that I want them to have the best dreams they ever had.
ja im kažem da želim da imaju najbolje snove koje mogu imati.
I want them to dream of rainbows and unicorns.
Želim da sanjaju o dugama i o jednorozima.
And ice cream for everybody.
I sladoled za sve.
And that's what I wish for you.
I to je ono što želim za vas.
Rainbows and unicorns and ice cream.
Duge, jednorozi i sladoled.
And it will be an okay day tomorrow.
I bit će dobar dan sutra.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hvala vam.